Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And yesterday I did a video talking about women's rights, the abortion issue, that's made national news here in the last year or two, and the abolishment of it nationally. And the young lady, the woman Margaret Sanger, who is so-called the founder of Planned Parenthood, and its relationship with eugenics and population control and things of that nature. Well, a lot of people don't know what eugenics is and how it correlates with abortion rights and even the legalities of women's rights in America, and how there's an overcast of institutionalized and even in vitro racism, and how the system or these particular systems have targeted individuals on whether they are worthy enough to live or die in vitro. And so let's get into what is the whole background behind eugenics. Eugenics and scientific racism. Eugenics is an inaccurate theory linked to historical and present-day forms of discrimination, racism, and colonialism. It has persisted in policies and beliefs around the world, including the United States. Now here's the big picture. Eugenics is the scientifically inaccurate theory that humans can be improved through selective breeding of populations. Eugenicists believed in a prejudiced and incorrect understanding of Mendelian genetics that claimed abstract human qualities, for example, intelligence and social behaviors, were inherited in a simple fashion. Similarly, they believe complex diseases and disorders were solely the outcome of genetic inheritance. The implementation of eugenics practices has caused widespread harm, particularly to populations that are being marginalized. Eugenics is not a fringe movement. Starting in the late 1800s, leaders and intellectuals worldwide perpetuated eugenic beliefs and policies based on common racist and xenophobic attitudes. Many of these beliefs and policies still exist in the United States today. The genomics community continue to work to scientifically debunk eugenic myths and combat modern-day manifestations of eugenics and scientific racism, particularly as they affect people of color, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ individuals. So what are eugenics and scientific racism? Eugenics is the scientifically erroneous and immoral theory of racial improvement and planned breeding, which gained popularity during the early 20th century. Eugenicists worldwide believed that they could perfect human beings and eliminate so-called social ills through genetics and hereditary. They believe the use of methods such as involuntary sterilization, segregation, and social exclusion would rid society of individuals deemed to be unfit. Scientific racism is an ideology that appropriates the methods and legitimacy of science to argue for the superiority of white Europeans and the inferiority of non-white people whose social and economic status have been historically marginalized. Like eugenics, scientific racism grew out of the misappropriation of revolutionary advances in medicine, anatomy, and statistics during the 18th and 19th centuries. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution through the mechanism of natural selection, Gregor Mendelian's laws of inheritance, Eugenic theories and scientific racism drew support from contemporary xenophobia, anti-Semitism, sexism, colonialism, and imperialism, as well as justifications of slavery, particularly in the United States. So how did eugenics begin? Francis Galton, an English statistician, demographer, and ethnologist, and he was the cousin of Charles Darwin, coined the term eugenics in 1883. Galton defined eugenics as the study of agencies under social control that may improve or impair the racial qualities of future generations, either physically or mentally. Galton claimed that health and disease, as well as social and intellectual characteristics, were based upon heredity and the concept of race. During the 1870s and the 1880s, discussions of human improvement and the ideology of scientific racism became increasingly common. The so-called experts determined individuals and groups of people to be either superior or inferior. They believed biological and behavioral characteristics were fixed and unchangeable, and placed individuals, populations, and nations inside that hierarchy. So what did eugenics look like across the globe? By the 1920s, eugenics had become a global movement. There was popular, elite, and governmental support for eugenics in Germany, the United States, Great Britain, Italy, Mexico, Canada, and other countries. Statisticians, economists, and anthropologists, sociologists, social reformers, geneticists, public health officials, and members of the general public supported eugenics through a variety of academic and popular literature. The most well-known application of eugenics occurred in Nazi Germany in the lead up to World War II and the Holocaust. The Nazi German racial state between 1933 and 1945 used its resources to cleanse the German people and the Nazi state of those they deemed unworthy of life. Nazis in Germany, Austria, and other occupied territories euthanized at least 70,000 adults and 5,200 children. They implemented a campaign of forced sterilization that claimed at least 400,000 victims. This culminated in the near destruction of the Jewish people, as well as an effort to eliminate other marginalized ethnic minorities, such as the Sinti and Roma, individuals with disabilities, and LGBTQ people. So what did eugenics look like in the United States? In the United States, slavery and its legacy, fears of miscegenation, and eugenics were deeply connected in the early 20th century. Prominent American eugenicists expounded on their concerns of race suicide, or the increasing differential birth rates between immigrants and non-Nordic races compared to native-born Nordic whites. Eugenicists used these concerns to promote discriminatory policies like anti-immigration and sterilization. American eugenicists from a variety of disciplines declared certain individuals to be unfit, feeble-minded, or antisocial, which resulted in the involuntary sterilization of at least 60,000 people through 30 states' laws by the 1970s in the U.S. These eugenicists disproportionately targeted Latinos, Native Americans, African Americans, poor whites included, and people with disabilities during the entire 20th century. Eugenicists were also crucial to the enactment of discriminatory immigration legislation that was passed in 1924, which is called the Johnson-Reed Act, which completely excluded immigrants from Asia. So, do eugenics and scientific racism still exist? The answer is yes. While eugenics movements especially flourished during the 3 decades before the end of World War II, eugenics practices such as involuntary sterilization, forced institutionalization, social ostracization, and stigma were common in many states until at least the 1970s. That's 50 years ago. And in some instances have continued into the present in various forms. And this is where the whole abortion Planned Parenthood comes into this effect. Is this a form of eugenics? Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger. With the completion of the Human Genome Project, HGP, and more recently advances in genomic screening technologies, there is some concern about whether generating an increasing amount of genomic information in the prenatal setting would lead to new societal pressures to terminate pregnancies, where the fetus is at heightened risk for genetic disorders such as Down syndrome and spinal bifida. So, for example, they're saying with prenatal testing, if they find out that this fetus or baby could be low IQ, have Down syndrome, or other disorders, should they go ahead and pressure that mother to terminate the pregnancy? Is that a form of eugenics? And so prenatal testing has its controversy. Are you prenatally testing from a medical standpoint just to make sure that the baby and the mother is okay? Are you also prenatal genetic testing to see if there's going to be an inferior being being born, and should we terminate that person? The emergence of statistical techniques such as polygenic risk scores that can estimate risk for more genetically complex disorders have raised concerns among ethicists that their use in the context of an in vitro fertilization and pre-implementation genetic disorders, the possible genomic-based screening of embryos for behavioral, psychosocial, and or intellectual traits would be reminiscent of the history of eugenics, which is what I just said, in its attempt to eliminate certain individuals. So if that's the case, not only is life tough once you're born, there is systematic designs to destroy individuals in vitro. It's a tough world. Some geneticists view both genomic screening and genetic counseling as an extension of eugenics. So what is the National Human Genome Research Institute going to, how is the National Human Genome Research Institute going to address eugenics and scientific racism? When the HGP began in 1990, there was widespread concern that genomics would lead to a new era of eugenics. Many bioethicists were aware of how past eugenic movements used genetic information to ostracize historically marginalized groups and believed that people would use the outcomes of the HGP and subsequent developments in genomics to further marginalize and stigmatize certain groups. People were also concerned that the HGP would use in a new era of behavior genetics, where genes would be used to explain certain behaviors. Many discussions about the HGP revolved around whether employers or insurance companies could use genomic information to discriminate against specific individuals. In response to these and other concerns, the National Center for Human Genome Research, or now the National Human Genome Research Institute, NHGRI, founded the Ethical, Legal, and Societal Implications Research Program, the ELSI. For more than 3 decades, the NHGRI ELSI research program has funded research on all aspects of the social and ethical implications of genomics, including the legacies of eugenics and scientific racism in the context of new and emerging genetic and genomic technologies. Building on a long tradition of these legacies, the National Human Genome Research Institute is committed to taking proactive steps to provide leadership in the field of genomics in addressing structural racism and anything that will foster eugenics-based ideas. Together with efforts of the National Institute of Health, including the Unite Initiative, the NHGRI will continue to combat the legacies of eugenics and scientific racism and their present-day manifestations to develop an inclusive and welcoming genomics community. So that is a lot to take in, and I wanted to do a story on that. So I'm sure people have heard the word eugenics and may have not researched it or read about it, but I wanted to do a video on it and talk about its deleterious association with Planned Parenthood, with Margaret Sanger. I would love for my viewers to look that up. I bring it up because we just had a presidential election, abortion issues and women's rights to their own bodies and choosing what to do with it has been a eye-raising, hair-browing issue. And there are some underbrewing elements that are associated with Planned Parenthood, eugenics, population control, that goes all the way back. There's an alleged association on how Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood using the model based out of Nazi Germany, and the whole idea of destroying an entire group and race of people. I think that before one makes an emotional decision about abortion rights, affirmative action, women's rights, LGBTQ, we should do our research and our homework and see where the historical perspectives come from in the past and how it correlates with today's time. If we have the presumption that that many of our medical professionals, when a young lady is pregnant, that they're doing in vitro testing to make sure of the health and wealth of the baby and the mother, but it also makes you wonder, are they also doing that to see if there is going to be a possible inferior or disabled being that is going to be born, and are those mothers being pressured to terminate the pregnancy? That way we can have a more superior, intellectually, physically capable human beings that are on this earth. God created all of us, whether you have disabilities or not. We all are looked at as God's children in his eyes, and everybody deserves a fighting chance to take advantage of this wonderful world we call Earth. Tell me what you think about the history of eugenics, its relationship with Planned Parenthood, and this whole ideology of population control. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth.